My name is Maya. I am 32 years old and the founder of a venture capital firm in Atlanta. A month ago, I found out my parents wrote me out of their will and left our historic family estate to my brother, so I completely stopped paying their bills. A few weeks later, my mother texted me demanding to know why the mortgage was unpaid. No hello, no checking on my well-being, just a demand for cash. I simply replied that the bank was already processing the foreclosure and she should ask her sole heir for the money. That was the spark that burned their fake legacy to the ground. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who only loved you for your wallet. Growing up in a prominent African American family in Atlanta meant that appearances were everything. My father David is the senior pastor of a very large, very wealthy megachurch. My mother Vivian is his devoted first lady. She wears custom hats, designer suits, and a permanent smile of judgment. To the congregation, we were the perfect family. Behind closed doors, I was the designated bank and the family scapegoat, while my older brother Marcus was the untouchable golden child. The real conflict began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was summoned to our family attorney's office in Buckhead. I walked in wearing my tailored emerald green silk suit, fresh from closing a major acquisition deal. Sitting around the massive mahogany conference table were my parents, my 35-year-old brother Marcus, and his 33-year-old white wife Chloe. The tension in the room was suffocating. My father sat at the head of the table, his hands folded in quiet authority. My mother refused to even look at me. Marcus wore a smug expression that I had hated since childhood. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading the updated terms of my parents' estate planning. I sat perfectly still as he announced that my parents were leaving 100% of their assets to Marcus. This included the historic brownstone in the heart of Atlanta, a property that had been in our family for 3 generations, a property I had secretly been paying the property taxes on for the last 5 years. I was completely written out of the will. I received absolutely nothing, not a single dollar, not a piece of jewelry, not a square foot of property. My father looked at me with his practiced pastoral gaze, the one he used when delivering a sermon about sacrifice. He told me that Marcus was the man of the family. He said Marcus carried our last name and needed the foundation to build his legacy. My mother finally chimed in, adjusting her diamond necklace. She said I had chosen a secular, selfish path by focusing on my career instead of finding a husband. She actually said I was too independent for my own good, and that a single woman did not need a historic home. Before I could even process the sheer hypocrisy of their words, Chloe leaned forward. She rested her hand on her slightly rounded, pregnant belly, deploying her best, most fragile victim voice. She looked at me with wide, sympathetic eyes and said I needed to look at this with positive energy. She told me that Marcus carries the family name, and they needed the brownstone to build generational wealth for their children. She actually had the nerve to say, "Maya, you are a single woman. You do not need all these things. We need space to grow. You should be happy to support your brother's legacy." The audacity of her white privilege intersecting with my parents' deeply rooted misogyny was almost poetic. They really believed I was going to sit there and cry. They expected me to throw a tantrum, to beg for their love, to try and negotiate for my rightful place in the family. They wanted a reaction because my tears would validate their power over me. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached across the polished wood table, picked up the expensive fountain pen, and signed the acknowledgement of the will. I pushed the paper back to the lawyer. My parents looked slightly confused by my lack of emotion. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my silk trousers. I looked directly at my father and smiled. I told them it made perfect sense. I said it was just like the time they drained my college savings account to buy Marcus a brand new luxury car when he graduated with a useless degree. I reminded them how I had to work 3 jobs to pay for my own tuition, while Marcus crashed that same car 6 months later. My mother gasped, offended that I would bring up the past in front of the lawyer. She told me I was being bitter and ungrateful. I ignored her and pulled my phone out of my purse. Right there in front of all of them, I called my private wealth management team. I put the phone on speaker. When my account manager answered, I gave my authorization code and issued a clear set of instructions. I told him to immediately cancel the 2 supplementary black credit cards issued under my name to David and Vivian Williams. I then instructed him to terminate the automatic wire transfers that covered the monthly mortgage on the brownstone, the payments for my father's luxury SUV, and my mother's country club membership fees. The color drained from my parents' faces so fast they looked ghostly. Marcus jumped out of his chair, demanding to know what I was doing. Chloe clutched her pearls, her fake sympathy entirely gone. My father tried to use his booming preacher voice to command me to put the phone down. He said I was humiliating the family. I looked at him and said that since I was no longer part of their legacy, I was no longer funding their lifestyle. I told Marcus that since he was the sole heir, he could start paying the $5,000 a month it took to keep his precious inheritance out of foreclosure. I hung up the phone, turned around, and walked out of the law office without looking back. The silence I left in my wake was absolute. They had completely forgotten that the lavish lifestyle they loved to flaunt was heavily subsidized by the daughter they deemed unworthy. I went back to my penthouse and poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, feeling lighter than I had in decades. But I knew my family. I knew their pride and their absolute addiction to appearances. They thought I would cool off and turn the money back on. They thought they could wait me out. They were wrong. Less than a week later, the consequences of their actions hit them in the most public way possible. My mother was hosting her monthly luncheon for the elite ladies of the church at one of the most expensive fine dining restaurants in the city. She loved to show off her wealth, ordering top-tier seafood and imported waters for a table of 12 judgmental women. When the check arrived for over $1,000, my mother confidently handed the waiter the supplementary credit card I had given her years ago. A few minutes later, the manager walked out to the table. In front of all the church ladies, he quietly informed my mother that the card had been declined. My mother, completely humiliated, tried to run the card again. Declined. She tried a second card. Declined. She had absolutely no money of her own to cover the bill. The panic that set in was just the beginning of their nightmare. My phone started ringing before I even had the chance to finish my first glass of wine. The caller ID flashed, with a picture of my mother wearing her oversized Sunday hat. I took a slow breath, set my crystal wine glass down on the marble kitchen island, and answered the call. I did not even get a chance to say a single word of greeting. Her voice exploded through the speaker, shrill and trembling with absolute rage. "Maya, Vivian Williams, how dare you? Do you have any idea what you just did to me?" I was sitting at Chop's Lobster Bar with Sister Jenkins' First Lady Thomas and the rest of the pastoral committee board. We just finished a beautiful 3-course meal. I handed the waiter my platinum card to cover the luncheon, intending to bless those women. And he came back to the table, leaned down in front of everyone, and told me it was declined. Declined, Maya. In front of the most important wealthy women in our congregation. I had to pretend it was a bank error. I had to excuse myself to the restroom and call your father in a panic so he could transfer funds from the church emergency account just to save face and pay the bill. You humiliated me on purpose. You set me up to look like a fool. I listened to her panting heavily on the other end of the line. I paced slowly across the hardwood floors of my living room, looking out at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The city lights were just beginning to turn on, reflecting off the glass of my penthouse. "I told you exactly what was going to happen at the lawyer's office this afternoon, Mom. I told you I am no longer funding your lifestyle. You and Dad made your choice when you signed that will and handed everything over to Marcus. You told me I was not part of your legacy, so why should my money pay for your luxury lunches?" She scoffed loudly, the harsh sound echoing through the phone speaker. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything your father and I have done for you. We gave you life. We raised you in the best church in the city. We gave you a respectable upper-class upbringing. We clothed you and fed you and made sure you walked in the light of the Lord. And this is how you repay us. By throwing a temper tantrum and cutting off the credit cards like some petty vindictive child. You listen to me right now. I am the First Lady of Greater Grace Ministries. I demand respect. If you do not call your wealth manager and turn those cards back on right this second, I will stand at the pulpit this Sunday and tell the entire congregation exactly what kind of daughter you truly are. I will take the microphone and tell them you are a selfish, money-hungry heathen who abandoned her elderly parents in their time of need. I will make sure everyone knows you turned your back on your own blood. You will not be able to show your face at any social event in Atlanta ever again. Her threat hung heavy in the air. A few years ago, that exact kind of manipulation would have sent me into a blind panic. The church was the absolute epicenter of our social world, and my mother wielded gossip and public perception like a lethal weapon. She knew how to destroy a person's character with just a few whispered prayer requests. But I was not the same scared approval-seeking girl anymore. I had outgrown her shadow. I stopped pacing. I looked at my own reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, admiring the sharp cut of my emerald suit and the calm certainty in my eyes. "Are you going to tell them the truth, Mom?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. "Or are you going to tell them a fabricated story? Are you going to weave a tragic tale of your heartbreak? Just like the time you stood in front of the congregation and cried, telling everyone I got kicked out of college for poor grades." Silence stretched over the line. I knew I had hit a deep, ugly nerve. "You remember that, right?" I continued, not letting her interrupt or change the subject. I was 19 years old. I was working the night shift at a 24-hour diner, studying until my eyes bled just to keep my academic scholarship. But I still needed my portion of the tuition money that was sitting in our joint family savings account. The money I earned from my high school jobs and carefully deposited for my future. And when I went to the bursar's office to pay my tuition for the semester, the card bounced. I checked the account, and it was completely empty. Every single dollar was gone. She tried to stutter out an excuse, her voice losing its commanding volume, but I talked right over her. "You told everyone at church that the academic pressure was too much for me. You accepted all their pitying prayers and their sympathy casseroles while playing the heartbroken mother of a dropout. You let them whisper about me behind my back. But we both know the absolute truth. You drained my tuition fund to pay off Marcus and his massive sports gambling debts. You sacrificed my education, my future, and my reputation to save your golden boy from getting his legs broken by local bookies. You stole from me to cover his crimes. I had to take out predatory loans. I had to delay my graduation by 2 whole years. I ate ramen noodles in a freezing apartment while you bought Marcus a new car. So go ahead, Mom. Take the microphone this Sunday. Smear my name. But if you do, I promise you I will buy the giant billboard directly across the street from your church. I will paste the bank statements, the receipts, and the proof of every single bill I have paid for you and Marcus over the last 10 years. I will expose the fake luxury of your life to every single person who drives by." My mother gasped loudly, drawing in a ragged breath. She sounded as if I had physically struck her across the face. "You are sick," she spat, her voice venomous and shaking. "You are a cold, vindictive, nasty woman. Marcus is right about you. You have no loyalty to this family. You have no traditional values. You only care about yourself. You are dead to me, Maya. Do you hear me? Dead." She slammed the phone down so hard the line clicked instantly, leaving a hollow silence in my ear. I lowered the phone slowly. My hands were perfectly steady. I felt a massive rush of adrenaline pumping through my veins, making my heart race with absolute triumph. For my entire life, she had used shame to keep me in line. She had used the church, the tight-knit community, and the paralyzing fear of being a social outcast to force me into submission. But she had no power over me anymore. I had my own money, my own highly successful company, and my own independent life. Her words could no longer break me. I walked back to the kitchen island and picked up my wine glass. I took a long, deep sip, savoring the rich, complex flavors of the vintage red. The silence in the penthouse was beautiful and deeply satisfying. Suddenly, my phone vibrated aggressively against the marble countertop. The screen lit up with a text message notification. It was from Marcus. I picked it up and read the words. The message was dripping with his usual entitled arrogance and unearned confidence. You really think you did something today, huh? You think cutting off mom and dad makes you the boss. You are nothing but a jealous, lonely woman who cannot stand to see her older brother win. You have always been bitter that I am the favorite. But the joke is on you, little sister. I do not need your pathetic handouts anyway. I just used my power of attorney to mortgage the brownstone for $2.5 million. The funds hit my account next week for my new tech startup. I am going to be 10 times richer than you will ever be. Once my company takes off, I am going to make sure you have to beg on your knees to even walk through the front door of our family home. You just wait and see. I read the message twice to ensure I was fully comprehending his sheer stupidity. My eyes locked onto the amount. $2.5 million. He had actually mortgaged the historic family home. The gorgeous multi-million-dollar house that had been passed down through generations of our family. The exact house my parents had just gleefully handed over to him in their new will this very afternoon. He was leveraging a priceless piece of our family history for a doomed tech startup that had absolutely zero revenue, no product, and no viable business plan. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face, lighting up my features. Marcus had always been incredibly arrogant, but he was also breathtakingly foolish. He truly thought he was untouchable because our parents had always shielded him from the harsh consequences of the real world. He thought he had completely outsmarted me by finding another source of cash. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to legally and permanently destroy his entire world. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face, lighting up my features. Marcus had always been incredibly arrogant, but he was also breathtakingly foolish. He truly thought he was untouchable because our parents had always shielded him from the harsh consequences of the real world. He thought he had completely outsmarted me by finding another source of cash. He had absolutely no idea that he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to legally and permanently destroy his entire world. I stared at the encrypted email from Sarah, the harsh blue light of my phone illuminating the dark interior of my car. $2.5 million. Federal fraud. Identity theft. My own family had not just crossed a line of morality, they had sprinted past the boundary of the law. They were so desperate to maintain their illusion of generational wealth and fund Marcus's phantom tech startup that they had forged my signature to secure a predatory loan. They had used my pristine credit score and my corporate financial history to guarantee a sum of money they could never repay. A cold, absolute calm washed over me. They had handed me the exact weapon I needed. I stared at the encrypted email from Sarah, the harsh blue light of my phone illuminating the dark interior of my car. $2.5 million. Federal fraud, identity theft. My own family had not just crossed a line of morality, they had sprinted past the boundary of the law. They were so desperate to maintain their illusion of generational wealth and fund Marcus's phantom tech startup that they had forged my signature to secure a predatory loan. They had used my pristine credit score and my corporate financial history to guarantee a sum of money they could never repay. A cold, absolute calm washed over me. They had handed me the exact weapon I needed. Sunday morning arrived with the relentless buzzing of my smartphone. It was vibrating so violently against my nightstand that it threatened to fall off the edge. I reached over my eyes, adjusting to the bright morning light filtering through the bedroom windows. The lock screen was completely flooded with notifications. Dozens of text messages, voicemails, and direct messages across every social media platform were pouring in by the second. I unlocked the device and opened my messaging app. The onslaught of judgment was staggering. There was a message from Deacon Miller telling me that honoring my father and mother was a commandment, not a suggestion. There was a text from Aunt Beatrice expressing her deep disappointment in my secular, selfish behavior. Cousin Jamal sent a long paragraph about how I was tearing the family apart over petty jealousy. Dozens of church members were tagging me in prayers for my lost soul. I did not have to guess what had triggered this coordinated attack. I opened the live stream application for Greater Grace Ministries on my tablet. The camera panned across the massive cavernous sanctuary, which seated over 5,000 people. The lighting was dramatic, focused entirely on the raised, velvet-lined stage. The church band was playing a soft, mournful melody in the background specifically designed to manipulate the emotional atmosphere of the room. And there, standing behind the grand acrylic pulpit, was my father. Pastor David Williams was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He was gripping the edges of the pulpit, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with manufactured grief. He pulled a crisp, monogrammed white handkerchief from his suit pocket and dabbed at his eyes. He did not say my name directly. He was far too seasoned a manipulator for that. Instead, he painted a tragic masterpiece using heavy metaphors. He spoke to the massive congregation about the heartbreak of watching a child being led astray by the golden calf of modern ambition. He wept into the microphone, his voice cracking perfectly on cue, talking about a daughter who had been blinded by the devil of corporate greed. He lamented how painful it was for a parent to be abandoned by their own flesh and blood after sacrificing everything to give them a foundation of faith. The camera angle shifted, cutting to the front row. My mother Vivian was sitting perfectly upright, her head draped in a custom black fascinator hat, dabbing her dry eyes with a matching tissue. Chloe was sitting next to her, rubbing her pregnant belly while looking profoundly devastated. Marcus sat beside them, wearing a designer suit, bought with my money, shaking his head in solemn agreement with my father's sermon. The congregation murmured in sympathy. People were standing up, raising their hands, calling out prayers for the poor, heartbroken pastor and his family. I watched the screen as a sharp metallic taste coated my tongue. They were weaponizing the congregation against me. They were using the sacred space of the church to assassinate my character preemptively, destroying my reputation, so that if I ever tried to tell the truth, I would simply look like the bitter, estranged daughter they had just described. They thought public pressure would break me. They thought being socially ostracized by the elite African American community of Atlanta would force me to crawl back, apologize, and quietly pay off their massive new loan. I closed the live stream application. I walked into my massive walk-in closet and bypassed the dark conservative business suits. Today required something entirely different. Today required a visual statement of absolute authority. I selected a pristine, tailored white crepe suit. It was sharp, immaculate, and utterly unbothered. I paired it with gold stiletto heels and a heavy gold watch. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe style. I looked like a woman who owned everything she touched. I grabbed a simple manila envelope from my home office desk, slid the printed evidence of their federal fraud inside, and walked out the door. The drive to Greater Grace Ministries took exactly 20 minutes. The massive parking lot was overflowing, but I bypassed the general sections and pulled my custom sports car directly into the reserved VIP spot right near the grand entrance. I stepped out of the car, the humid Georgia heat barely registering against my skin. I walked through the towering glass doors of the sanctuary, just as my father was reaching the emotional crescendo of his sermon. The usher standing by the inner doors recognized me instantly. His eyes widened in absolute shock, his mouth falling open to say something, but I did not stop. I pushed past him, the heavy wooden doors swinging open to reveal the cavernous, packed auditorium. The sheer scale of the room was breathtaking. Over 5,000 people sat in the curved velvet pews, completely captivated by my father's tears. I stepped into the center aisle. My gold heels clicked sharply against the polished marble floor. The sound was distinct, cutting right through the soft humming of the church choir. People in the back rows turned around to look. The whispers started immediately spreading forward like a sudden wave crashing across the room. Heads turned, eyes locked onto me. I could feel the intense heavy weight of 5,000 judgmental stares surrounding me from every possible angle. It was a suffocating panoramic wall of public scrutiny, an ocean of people who had just been told I was a selfish, godless monster. I did not look at any of them. I kept my chin perfectly level, my eyes fixed entirely on the stage. I walked at a slow, deliberate pace down the long center aisle. The congregation physically parted, leaning away from me as if my presence alone was scandalous. The whispering grew louder, transforming into a low, chaotic hum that drowned out the soft music playing from the stage. My father looked up from the pulpit. He saw the commotion in the center aisle. He saw me walking toward him in stark, pristine white. His voice faltered. The microphone picked up his sharp intake of breath. He stopped speaking completely. In the front row, my mother turned around. Her eyes went wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. She gripped the wooden back of the pew so hard her knuckles turned white. Marcus froze, the smug expression wiped instantly from his face. Chloe actually shrank back in her seat. They had expected me to hide in shame. They had expected me to call them begging for forgiveness. They had never anticipated that I would march directly into the heart of their performance. I reached the front of the sanctuary. I did not stop at the altar. I walked right up the carpeted stairs leading to the sacred pulpit. The entire church was dead silent now, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. You could hear a pin drop in that massive room. My father stood frozen behind the acrylic podium, his hands gripping the edges, his knuckles white. He looked at me with a mixture of rage and absolute panic. He leaned back slightly as I approached, his chest heaving under his tailored suit. I did not say a single word to him. I did not yell. I did not defend myself. I did not justify my existence to the thousands of people watching us. I simply reached out and placed the crisp manila envelope directly on top of his open leather-bound Bible. I let my hand rest on the envelope for a fraction of a second, tapping the paper lightly. Inside that envelope was the complete, undeniable proof of their forged $2.5 million loan application. It contained the exact timestamps the IP addresses used to forge my signature and a typed notice stating that the penalty for federal financial fraud carried a minimum mandatory prison sentence. I leaned in extremely close to my father. I could smell the expensive cologne he had bought with my money. I lowered my voice so that only he could hear me, keeping my tone deadly soft and perfectly polite. Preach on that, Pastor. I turned around my white suit, catching the theatrical stage lights, and walked back down the stairs. I glided past my mother, who was practically hyperventilating in the front row. I walked right past Marcus, who looked like he was about to vomit. I walked back down the center aisle, the sea of bewildered churchgoers parting for me once again. I walked out of the sanctuary, out of the heavy glass doors, and into the bright Sunday sunlight, leaving the entire congregation in a state of absolute paralyzed shock. I slid into the driver's seat of my car and closed the heavy door, locking out the noise of the world. The silence inside the leather interior was beautiful. My heart was beating with a steady, rhythmic power. I picked up my phone from the passenger seat. I did not call the local police. I did not call the FBI to report the stolen identity. Having my father and brother arrested for fraud would be too fast. It would allow them to play the victims of a broken justice system. It would let my mother cry on television about her persecuted family. That was not enough. I needed to dismantle their entire foundation. I needed to own the ground they walked on. I scrolled through my contacts and dialed the private number for my personal corporate attorney. He answered on the second ring. Maya. He said, his voice crisp and professional. Have you reviewed the evidence Sarah sent over regarding the forged loan documents? Do you want me to contact the federal authorities and file the fraud charges? I stared out the windshield at the towering steeple of Greater Grace Ministries. No, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calculated. Do not report them to the authorities. Do not flag the fraud. I want you to contact the private equity firm they applied to. I want you to use Apex Capital, my secondary shell investment fund, to quietly buy out that exact debt portfolio. I want you to personally approve and disburse the $2.5 million loan directly into Marcus's bank account by tomorrow morning. The lawyer paused, clearly confused by the directive. Maya, he said carefully, that loan is predatory. The interest rates are astronomical, and the terms allow for immediate asset seizure upon default. If you approve this, you are giving them enough rope to hang themselves. I smiled, turning the key in the ignition and listening to the engine roar to life. Exactly, I replied. Let them have the money. Let Marcus buy his luxury cars and fund his fake tech company. Let my mother believe they have won. I do not just want to cancel their credit cards. I want to become their sole creditor. Disperse the funds immediately. The view from the 42nd floor of my corporate headquarters offered a breathtaking panoramic sweep of the Atlanta skyline. My office was a fortress of glass steel and polished walnut. It was a physical manifestation of everything I had built with my own two hands. The space was completely insulated from the noise of the city below, designed for absolute focus and high-level negotiations. It was certainly not designed for petty family drama. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the morning traffic crawl along the interstate, still feeling the lingering satisfaction of my phone call with my attorney. The trap had been successfully set. The funds were being prepared for disbursement. Marcus was about to willingly sign his own financial death warrant. The heavy silence of my sanctuary was suddenly shattered by a loud commotion outside my double-glass doors. I turned just in time to see my executive assistant stepping backward, holding her hands up defensively. Pushing right past her, practically vibrating with unearned entitlement, was my sister-in-law, Chloe. She marched into my office as if she held the deed to the building. She was wearing a pastel tweed suit that was trying desperately to scream old money, but instead whispered clearance rack. Clutched tightly in her hand, displayed prominently for maximum visibility, was a bright orange leather handbag. My assistant looked at me, her face flushed with apology, and asked if she should call building security. I simply raised my hand, giving her a subtle nod to dismiss herself. I told her it was fine and that my guest would not be staying long. The heavy glass doors clicked shut, sealing Chloe and me inside the expansive room. Chloe took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of her tweed jacket. Her eyes darted around the massive office, taking in the custom art pieces, the sprawling private conference area, and the absolute luxury of the space. I could see a brief, unmistakable flash of intense jealousy cross her face before she forcefully arranged her features into an expression of deep, sickeningly sweet maternal concern. She placed a hand on her pregnant belly, a calculated gesture she used whenever she needed to remind the world of her delicate condition. She walked over to the guest chair across from my desk and sat down without being invited. She placed the bright orange bag right in the center of my pristine glass desk. Maya. She began using a soft, breathy voice that she usually reserved for speaking to toddlers or Sunday school classes. I know you are probably surprised to see me, but I felt it was incredibly important for us to sit down and talk woman to woman, without the men around to complicate things. I walked slowly from the window to my desk. I did not sit down. I simply leaned against the edge of the glass, crossing my arms over my chest, and waited for the performance to begin. Chloe sighed heavily, shaking her head as if carrying the weight of the entire world on her shoulders. Marcus is under a tremendous amount of pressure right now. You know how hard it is for him to carry the burden of the Williams family legacy. He is trying to build an empire for his children, and the stress is just eating him alive. And then there is this whole unfortunate situation with you and your parents. She leaned forward, her eyes wide and swimming with manufactured pity. David and Vivian told me everything, Maya. They told me how much you are struggling. They explained that your sudden outburst at the lawyer's office and your decision to cut off their supplementary cards was just a cry for help. They know you are having severe financial difficulties. They said your little business must be failing, and that is why you are acting out so selfishly. It is financially terrifying to be a single woman with no husband to fall back on. And we understand that fear is making you lash out at the people who love you most. I stared at her, genuinely fascinated by the sheer magnitude of the delusion. My parents, entirely dependent on my money to fund their luxury lifestyle, had actually convinced their gullible daughter-in-law that I was the one going broke. They had spun a narrative where my refusal to be extorted was actually a symptom of my own poverty. Chloe reached into her fake designer bag and pulled out a leather checkbook. She opened it with a grand theatrical flourish and clicked a pen. Marcus and I discussed it, she said, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. And we want to be the bigger people. We want to extend grace. We know you need cash right now, so I'm going to write you a personal check for $10,000. Consider it a gift to help you get back on your feet. She paused, holding the pen over the paper, looking up at me with a sharp, calculating glint in her eye. But she continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. In exchange for this financial blessing, you need to do the right thing for the family. We need you to immediately contact the bank and completely withdraw whatever ridiculous complaint you filed regarding that forged signature on the loan documents. It was just a minor administrative misunderstanding. Marcus simply signed on your behalf to expedite the paperwork. It is not a big deal. Take the $10,000, drop the complaint, and let the family move forward in peace. She smiled fully, believing she had just executed a masterful mafia-level negotiation. She truly thought she was standing on the high ground, offering a lifeline to a desperate, bitter woman. I let the silence stretch out in the room. I let it drag on until her confident smile began to waver, replaced by a nervous twitch at the corner of her mouth. I slowly stood up straight. I walked around the desk, standing directly over her. I looked down at the bright orange bag she had placed so proudly on my workspace. I reached out and ran a single finger over the stitching on the handle. "Put your checkbook away, Chloe," I said, my voice dangerously soft and perfectly flat. She bristled, her back stiffening against the chair. "Maya, do not let your pride ruin you. $10,000 is a lot of money for someone in your position." I tapped the bright orange leather of her handbag. I told her that the stitching on the handle of her supposed Hermes Birkin was perfectly uniform, indicating it was machine-sewn rather than hand-stitched by an artisan. I pointed out that the hardware was overly brassy and the stamping was slightly crooked. I informed her that she was carrying a mid-tier counterfeit bag that likely cost her $300 on a sketchy internet website. Chloe turned bright red, instantly snatching the bag off my desk and clutching it to her chest, as if I had physically assaulted her. Then I opened my desk drawer. I pulled out a thick, professionally bound document and tossed it onto the glass surface right in front of her. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. I told her to open it. She stared at the document, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. When she refused to move, I reached over and flipped the cover open for her. "That is your husband's complete corporate tax filing and current profit and loss statement for the last 3 fiscal years," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the large office. "Go ahead and look at the bottom line, Chloe. Look at the numbers. Marcus has not generated a single dollar of revenue in 36 months. He has burned through every cent of his initial investments. He has defaulted on 2 commercial leases. His company is not an empire. It is a completely empty shell, drowning in unpaid vendor invoices. You are offering me a $10,000 check from a bank account that is currently overdrawn by $400. Chloe stared at the financial report, her eyes tracking the endless columns of red ink and negative balances. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and genuinely horrified. She knew Marcus was stressed, but he had clearly been lying to her about the reality of their financial ruin. I leaned down closer to her, ensuring she heard every single syllable I spoke. "I do not have financial difficulties, Chloe. I own the building you are currently sitting in. I own the venture capital firm that operates on the top 4 floors. My net worth has an extra comma compared to the fake numbers your husband boasts about at country club dinners. I do not need a $10,000 bad check from a leech who carries a fake handbag and lives in a house she cannot afford." The shock on her face rapidly morphed into a defensive, volatile rage. The sweet maternal peacemaker act vanished completely, revealing the vicious, entitled woman underneath. She jumped to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "You are a miserable, nasty, jealous woman," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are just bitter because no man wants you. You are trying to destroy Marcus because he is the son your parents actually love. You think you are so smart with your fancy office and your money, but you are nothing. You are a sad, lonely spinster who will die alone with her bank accounts." I did not flinch. I just stood there letting her scream, watching her absolutely self-destruct. "We do not need you," she yelled, her face contorted with fury. "We do not need your money or your approval or your fake concern. Marcus is a genius. He just secured a massive round of Tier 1 funding. We are getting $2.5 million next week. We are going to be richer than you could ever imagine." She grabbed her counterfeit bag and marched toward the glass doors, spinning around for one final venomous threat. "The money is coming from a private investment firm called Apex Capital. They actually believe in his vision. And once that money hits our accounts, I promise you, Maya, I am going to use our wealth to run you completely out of this city. You will be nothing but a footnote in our legacy." She turned and stormed out of the office, slamming the heavy glass door so hard the metal hinges rattled. I stood alone in the absolute quiet of my office. I looked down at the financial report detailing Marcus's failures. Then I looked toward the door where Chloe had just delivered her dramatic, triumphant exit. I smiled a slow, deep smile of absolute satisfaction. She was incredibly excited about the $2.5 million coming from Apex Capital. She was ready to conquer the world with that money. What the foolish, arrogant woman did not realize was that I was the sole founder, president, and majority shareholder of Apex Capital, and I was about to own their entire miserable existence. I walked slowly toward the custom wet bar tucked into the far corner of my executive office, my heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet. The afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long, golden shadows across the polished walnut floor. I reached for a heavy crystal decanter, the faceted glass catching the light and fracturing it into a dozen brilliant prisms. I poured a generous measure of a bold vintage Cabernet Sauvignon into a long-stemmed glass. The rich ruby liquid swirled smoothly against the crystal. The entire world outside my floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to slow down, matching the deliberate, unhurried rhythm of my breathing. This was the quiet, exquisite calm right before the storm. My secure desktop terminal chimed with a soft, singular notification. I carried my wine glass back to my desk, my movements fluid and completely relaxed. I tapped the spacebar to wake the screen. It was an encrypted confirmation message from Sarah, my lead financial investigator. The subject line was remarkably brief. Disbursement complete. Funds transferred. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine, letting the complex flavors settle on my tongue. $2.5 million had just successfully cleared the highest security protocols of Apex Capital and landed directly into Marcus's personal checking account. The bait had been completely swallowed. The trap was locked. I knew exactly what Marcus would do with that money. A smart businessman, a man who actually understood capital and equity, would have immediately allocated those funds to payroll, product development, or securing strategic partnerships for his so-called technology startup. But Marcus was not a smart businessman. Marcus was a golden child who had spent his entire life playing dress-up in my parents' delusions. He did not want to build a company. He wanted the aesthetic of being a chief executive officer. He wanted the applause without the labor. I did not have to wait long to be proven right. Less than 48 hours after the wire transfer cleared, my personal cell phone illuminated with an Instagram notification. It was from Marcus's public profile. I opened the application and let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed through the empty expanse of my penthouse living room. There he was standing proudly in the pristine, brightly lit delivery bay of an exclusive luxury car dealership in Buckhead. He was leaning casually against the hood of a brand-new matte black Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. The vehicle was completely tricked out with oversized custom rims, a blood-red leather interior, and heavily tinted windows. Marcus was wearing designer sunglasses indoors, holding up the keys to the camera, with a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. The caption beneath the photo was a masterpiece of unearned arrogance. It read, "CEO Life. When you secure that Tier 1 funding, you have to treat yourself. God is good. The hustle never stops. Big moves coming." He had actually done it. He had taken a high-interest predatory commercial loan secured by federal fraud and identity theft, and his very first administrative action was to purchase a $250,000 depreciating liability. He was actively documenting his own financial crimes on social media for the entire world to see. It was a level of sheer stupidity that was almost breathtaking to witness. Before I could even close the application, my phone vibrated again. This time a text message appeared on my screen. It was from my mother, Vivian. I opened the thread. Her words were sharp, vindictive, and dripping with that familiar venomous superiority she loved to wield against me. "See," she wrote, "your brother raised capital entirely on his own. He is a brilliant man making massive moves. I told you that you were not the only one in this family who knows how to make money. We do not need your dirty money or your disrespectful attitude anymore. Stay away from us." I read the message twice, marveling at the absolute blindness of her arrogance. She truly believed that Marcus had outsmarted the entire financial system. She thought he had miraculously manifested millions of dollars through sheer brilliance and divine favor. She had absolutely no idea that her beloved son was currently dancing on a trapdoor, and I was the one holding the lever. I did not reply to her text message. I did not attempt to defend myself, nor did I point out the catastrophic danger they were currently in. Silence is the most terrifying weapon you can use against a narcissist. I simply locked my phone, set it face down on the marble kitchen island, and picked up my wine glass. Let them celebrate. Let them gorge themselves on the illusion of victory. The following morning, I arrived at my office early. The city was still waking up, a blanket of soft fog rolling through the downtown streets. I sat at the head of my private conference table. Sarah sat across from me, a thick stack of legal dossiers neatly aligned in front of her. "We are moving to the final phase," I said, my voice strictly business. "I want a complete update on the primary paper." Sarah nodded, opening the first dossier and sliding it across the polished wood toward me. "It is exactly as you suspected, Maya. The new loan from Apex Capital is secured as a secondary lien against the historic family brownstone. However, I quietly reached out to their primary mortgage lender, the national bank holding the original deed." She tapped a red highlighted column on the financial spreadsheet. "Your parents have been severely delinquent on the primary mortgage for 8 consecutive months. They have been entirely focused on keeping up appearances, buying designer clothes, and funding their church luncheons, completely ignoring the core debt on the property. The primary bank has already issued 2 warnings. They are currently drafting the pre-foreclosure notices. The bank considers the property a toxic asset, and they are incredibly eager to offload the risk before it becomes a public legal mess." A cold, calculated smile touched the corners of my mouth. "Buy it," I commanded softly. Sarah looked up, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Buy the entire primary mortgage." "Yes," I said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the cool glass of the conference table. "I want Apex Capital to aggressively acquire the primary debt from the national bank. Offer them a slight premium to expedite the transfer of the deed directly to our holding company by the end of the week. I do not just want to hold the secondary predatory loan. I want to own the original paper. I want to be the sole entity holding every single legal right to that historic family home." Sarah smiled, fully understanding the ruthless architecture of the trap. "I will initiate the corporate buyout immediately. Once the transfer is complete, Apex Capital will legally own the entire brownstone. If Marcus defaults on a single payment, or if he violates the strict commercial use covenants of the $2.5 million loan by, for instance, purchasing a luxury vehicle for personal use, we have the legal authority to trigger an immediate non-negotiable asset seizure." "Make it happen," I said, standing up from the table, "and ensure my name remains completely shielded behind the corporate LLC until I am ready to reveal it." 3 days passed in absolute beautiful silence. I immersed myself in the legitimate operations of my firm, closing acquisitions, and expanding my actual empire, while my family gleefully spent borrowed money on a fantasy. On Thursday afternoon, my receptionist walked into my office carrying a large, thick envelope. It was made of heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind used for high society weddings and elite charity galas. It was sealed with a shimmering gold wax stamp bearing the initial W for Williams. I took the envelope from her and sliced it open with a silver letter opener. Inside was a lavish, professionally printed invitation. The elegant calligraphy looped across the page, announcing the event of the season. It was an invitation to the Williams Family Legacy Anniversary Gala. The event was to be held at the historic brownstone that coming Saturday night. The text boasted that the gala was being thrown to celebrate the monumental success and recent massive Tier 1 funding round of Marcus's new technology firm. They were throwing a massive catered party to celebrate the money I had just secretly loaned them. Tucked neatly behind the formal invitation was a smaller handwritten note card. I immediately recognized my mother's sharp, aggressive handwriting. I pulled the card out and read the brief message. "We decided to be the bigger people and invite you. Come see what real generational wealth looks like. Come learn how to be a successful person. Try not to embarrass us. I stared at the handwritten note for a long time. The sheer towering audacity of my mother inviting me to my own childhood home to learn about success from a brother who had just committed federal fraud to buy a car was almost poetic. They were so incredibly eager to humiliate me. They wanted me to stand in the corner of that grand historic house and watch them be toasted by Atlanta's elite. They wanted to force me to watch Marcus accept the crown as the triumphant savior of the family name. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window holding the gold-embossed invitation in one hand and the handwritten note in the other. I looked down at the bustling city below, feeling the absolute terrifying power of the secret I held. I would not decline the invitation. I would not stay home and let them spin a narrative about my bitter jealousy. I would attend their spectacular gala. I would put on my finest designer gown. I would walk into that historic brownstone, drink their expensive champagne, and smile as they bragged about their phantom success. And then, right at the peak of their celebration, when the house was full of their wealthy friends, their pastoral committee, and everyone they had ever tried to impress, I was going to hand them the foreclosure notices. I was going to stand in the center of their grand ballroom and legally take their entire world away. Saturday evening descended upon Atlanta, wrapping the city in a sultry, humid embrace. I sat in the back of my chauffeured Maybach, watching the familiar oak-lined streets of my childhood neighborhood glide past the tinted windows. The historic family brownstone was situated in one of the most exclusive, heavily gated communities in the city. It was a sprawling three-story architectural masterpiece built in the late 1920s, boasting original mahogany woodwork, wraparound verandas, and a grand ballroom that my parents treated like their own personal palace. Tonight, it was illuminated like a beacon of false prosperity. My driver pulled up to the curb, slotting smoothly behind a line of idling Rolls-Royces and Bentleys. The low, deep purr of the engine cut out, and my security detail opened the door. I stepped out onto the cobblestone driveway. From a low angle, the sheer scale of the brownstone loomed behind me, but I did not feel small. I wore a striking floor-length crimson gown that moved like liquid fire paired with emerald-cut diamond earrings that caught the soft glow of the landscape lighting. I stood perfectly straight, my shoulders pulled back, exuding the absolute unshakable authority of a woman who held the executioner's axe. The front lawn had been transformed into a garish, over-the-top spectacle of nouveau riche desperation. They had rolled out an actual red carpet leading up the wide brick steps. Two massive, aggressively carved ice sculptures shaped like the letter W flanked the entrance, slowly weeping water onto the pristine walkway, and parked dead center, intentionally blocking the grand fountain so that every single guest was forced to walk around it, was Marcus's brand new matte black Mercedes G-Wagon. It was a glaring monument to his stupidity, purchased with the very funds I had secretly wired him just days ago. I walked up the red carpet, my heels clicking sharply against the brick. The heavy oak doors were propped wide open, spilling golden light, and the sound of a live jazz quartet out into the night air. The moment I crossed the threshold, the sheer scale of their financial recklessness washed over me. The grand foyer and adjoining ballroom were packed shoulder to shoulder with Atlanta's elite. It was a curated mix of the wealthiest members of Greater Grace Ministries, local politicians my father had aggressively courted, and desperate social climbers clinging to the illusion of the Williams family legacy. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres coated in truffle shavings. At the center of the room, Marcus and Chloe were putting on the performance of a lifetime. They were holding court, completely surrounded by a circle of fawning admirers. Marcus was wearing a bespoke velvet tuxedo, swirling a glass of scotch, and laughing a little too loudly at his own jokes. Chloe was draped in a silver sequined gown, her wrist heavy with a stack of diamond tennis bracelets that were definitely not counterfeit this time. They were playing the roles of the brilliant tech visionary and his supportive, glamorous wife to absolute perfection. They were literally drinking my money. I took a step further into the foyer, ready to slip into the crowd and watch the disaster unfold. But my mother was standing guard like a hawk. Vivian spotted me instantly. She was wearing an opulent, deep purple gown that hugged her frame, her neck glittering with heavy amethysts. The moment she saw me, her eyes narrowed into sharp, predatory slits. She immediately abandoned her conversation with the mayor's wife and marched directly toward the entryway, intentionally positioning her body to block my path into the main ballroom. She did not want a private conversation. She wanted an audience. She wanted to make a spectacle of my arrival to reinforce the narrative she had spun at the pulpit the previous Sunday. As she approached, she raised her voice, projecting it clearly over the soft jazz music so that the surrounding guests, including several prominent church gossips, would hear every single word. "Maya, darling," she announced, her tone dripping with a sickening theatrical blend of maternal pity and vicious condescension. "I am so incredibly surprised to see you here. Honestly, I am just glad you dared to come show your face tonight, especially considering you are currently unemployed and struggling so much with your finances." The music did not stop, but the conversations in our immediate vicinity certainly did. Heads turned, eyes locked onto me. A sudden tense hush fell over the grand foyer as the church elite leaned in their ears, practically burning with anticipation. Sister Jenkins, standing just a few feet away, actually pressed a hand to her pearls, her eyes wide with manufactured sympathy. My mother stood tall, a smug, triumphant smile plastered across her face. She truly believed she had just delivered a fatal, humiliating blow. She thought she had stripped me of my dignity right at the front door of her castle. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I let her words hang in the air, allowing the crowd to soak in her venom. Then a slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. I looked past her, casting a lazy, appreciative glance up at the soaring ceiling, the crystal chandeliers, and the grand, sweeping staircase. "Oh, do not worry about me, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying an effortless, ringing clarity that cut through the silence like glass. "I am not struggling at all. In fact, I am just here to inspect my property." The smug smile instantly vanished from my mother's face. Her brow furrowed in genuine, profound confusion. She opened her mouth, searching for a comeback, but her brain could not process the absolute certainty in my voice. Sister Jenkins gasped softly, exchanging a bewildered look with the woman standing next to her. "Inspect my property." The words made no sense to them. They thought I was delusional. They thought I was having a mental break from the stress of my supposed unemployment. I did not give my mother the chance to recover. I stepped smoothly around her frozen figure and glided straight into the heart of the ballroom. I walked past the towering floral arrangements that cost more than most people's annual rent. I walked past the carving stations and the open bars, fully aware that every single hors d'oeuvre, every drop of vintage wine, and every sequin on Chloe's dress was financed by Apex Capital. They were throwing a party in a house that my holding company now legally owned, using cash from a loan that gave me the unilateral power to seize all their assets. It was the most exquisite, beautifully poetic irony I had ever experienced. I found a quiet spot near the grand stone fireplace and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I leaned against the mantel, savoring the crisp, dry taste of the wine as I watched my family continue their charade. Marcus caught my eye from across the room. He gave me a mocking little salute with his Scotch glass, clearly riding the high of his stolen wealth. I raised my champagne flute in return, my smile cold and knowing. The atmosphere in the room slowly began to shift. The jazz quartet brought their song to a graceful close and put their instruments down. The low hum of conversation gradually faded as the lights in the grand ballroom were dimmed, leaving only the spectacular glow of the massive chandelier illuminating the sweeping mahogany staircase. My father stepped out onto the mid-level landing of the stairs, perfectly positioned above the crowd so that everyone was forced to look up at him. He was in his element. Pastor David Williams bathed in warm golden light, preparing to address his loyal flock. He tapped the microphone he was holding, the sharp thumping sound echoing through the expansive house and demanding absolute silence. The guests turned their attention to the staircase, their faces lifted in rapt anticipation. My mother hurried to the bottom of the stairs, clasping her hands together in a pose of pure devotion. Marcus and Chloe moved to the front of the crowd, standing directly beneath my father, practically vibrating with greedy excitement. My father cleared his throat, his deep, resonant voice filling the silence. Family, friends, and esteemed guests, he began flashing his signature charismatic smile. We have gathered here tonight in this historic home, not just to celebrate the blessings of the present, but to secure the absolute certainty of our future. We are here to witness the passing of the torch. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and slowly pulled out a thick leather-bound document folio. He held it up for the entire room to see. The crowd murmured in polite awe. Tonight, my father continued, his voice swelling with dramatic pride. We celebrate my son Marcus securing monumental funding to launch his visionary company. And to honor his brilliance, his mother and I are officially and publicly transferring the full deed, the legacy, and the absolute ownership of this historic family estate directly into his name. The grand foyer erupted into thunderous, rapturous applause. The sound bounced off the soaring ceilings and the crystal chandeliers, a deafening wave of validation for a man who had earned absolutely none of it. My father, beaming with the righteous pride of a patriarch securing his bloodline, held out the thick leather folio. Marcus stepped forward. He paused for just a fraction of a second, ensuring the hired photographer captured his profile in the golden light before pulling our father into a deep, theatrical embrace. The church elders clapped harder. The mayor nodded with solemn approval. Standing near the front, Chloe pressed a manicured hand to her chest, her eyes shimmering with manufactured tears as she gazed up at her husband. She looked exactly like a queen consort watching her king be crowned. My father handed the folio over. Inside that expensive embossed leather casing was a piece of paper transferring the family trust and the deed of the brownstone into Marcus's name. What neither my father, my mother, nor my arrogant brother realized was that the paper was entirely worthless. You cannot transfer a legacy when the bank has already repossessed the bricks and mortar. But they did not know that yet. To them, this was the ultimate victory. Marcus took the document with a grave, practiced nod. He handed it down to Chloe, who received it as if it were the Holy Grail itself, clutching it to her silver-sequined gown. Then Marcus turned back to the crowd. He reached out and adjusted the microphone stand, his heavy gold cufflinks flashing in the light. If a camera were tracking this precise moment in time, it would have panned seamlessly from the flushed, deeply triumphant face of my brother, soaking in the absolute adoration of the room, straight through the crowd, to the freezing, immaculate stillness of my own smile. "Thank you, Marcus," began, his voice dropping into a smooth, practiced baritone that he had clearly copied from our father. "Thank you all so much. I look out at this room tonight, and I see family. I see pillars of the community. I see the people who have stood by the Williams name through thick and thin." He paused, letting a heavy, humble sigh escape his lips. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium. "Carrying a legacy is not an easy task," he continued, shaking his head slowly. "Building an empire from the ground up requires vision. It requires blood, sweat, and absolute faith. There were times when the road was dark. There were times when people, even people who share my own blood, doubted my vision. They looked at my ambition and called it foolishness. They looked at my drive and called it reckless. The room grew hushed. The tension in the air thickened. Everyone in that foyer knew exactly who he was talking about. My mother, Vivian, stood at the base of the stairs, her chin tilted up, looking incredibly vindicated. Sister Jenkins leaned forward, her eyes darting through the crowd to find my face. But true vision cannot be stopped by small-minded jealousy. Marcus declared, his voice rising in volume and power. True greatness attracts greatness. And that is why I am so incredibly humbled and proud to announce that my technology firm has just successfully closed a massive $2.5 million round of Tier 1 funding. The crowd erupted again, cheering and whistling. Marcus held up a hand, asking for silence, so he could deliver his final fatal blow. His eyes scanned the room, locking directly onto mine. He did not look away. He wanted to make sure I felt every single syllable. "This funding did not come from a bank. Marcus said, a cruel, mocking edge creeping into his tone. It came from a premier aggressive venture capital firm called Apex Capital, a firm that actually understands excellence, a firm that looks at the market and knows a winner when they see one. He leaned closer to the microphone, his eyes burning with absolute toxic arrogance as he stared me down. I have learned a very hard lesson on my journey to the top, he said, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper that echoed through the grand house. I have learned that there are people in this world who are born to wear the crown, and there are those who are simply destined to be the stepping stones. You cannot let the stepping stones hold you back. You have to know your place in the kingdom. So tonight, as I take ownership of this historic family estate, I want to publicly thank Apex Capital for recognizing my crown. He smiled a wide, breathtakingly vicious smile. The ballroom exploded into applause. Chloe let out a sharp whoop of joy. My father clapped his hands together, his face glowing with patriarchal pride. My mother turned to look at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated triumph. They had done it. They had publicly humiliated the difficult, ungrateful daughter and elevated the golden son to the level of a god. I stood near the grand fireplace, letting the waves of applause wash over me. I did not shrink. I did not look away. I simply raised my champagne flute, took one final slow sip of the crisp wine, and placed the empty crystal glass onto the silver tray of a paralyzed, wide-eyed waiter. It was time. I smoothed my hands down the front of my crimson gown. I rolled my shoulders back, feeling the cool, heavy weight of the emerald-cut diamonds against my skin. I stepped away from the fireplace and began to walk. The crowd in front of me, naturally, almost involuntarily, began to part. The sea of tuxedos and expensive evening gowns separated as I moved toward the grand mahogany staircase. My heels clicked with a steady, rhythmic, terrifying precision against the polished hardwood floor. The applause began to falter, rippling into a confused, low murmur, as the guests realized the family scapegoat was not retreating to the shadows. She was advancing to the front lines. My mother saw me moving, and panic instantly shattered her triumphant facade. She lunged forward, attempting to physically block my path at the base of the stairs. "Maya," she hissed, her voice a frantic, venomous whisper, her eyes wide with desperate warning. Do not you dare ruin your brother's moment. Turn around and walk out the front door right now." I did not stop walking. I did not even slow down. As I reached her, I simply locked my eyes onto hers and spoke with a coldness that made her physically recoil. "Move, Vivian, or I will have security remove you from my property." The words did not process in her brain. She stood frozen in absolute shock, her mouth hanging open, trying to decipher the sheer authority in my voice. Before she could recover, I swept past her, my crimson dress brushing against her purple gown. I began to ascend the stairs. Above me on the landing, the celebratory smiles on the faces of my father and brother rapidly evaporated. David stiffened, his pastoral composure cracking as he gripped the railing. Marcus glared down at me, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. He was furious that I was daring to interrupt his coronation, but he was completely trapped. He could not yell at me. He could not push me down the stairs. The mayor of Atlanta, the chief of police, and half of the church elders were watching us with bated breath. He was imprisoned by his own desperate need to maintain his public image. I reached the landing. I was now standing shoulder to shoulder with the golden child and the patriarch. The height advantage they had enjoyed moments ago was completely neutralized. "Maya," David whispered through gritted teeth, maintaining a rigid plastic smile for the crowd below. "Go back down the stairs immediately. This is not your time." I ignored him entirely. I turned my body to face Marcus. He stood his ground, clutching the microphone stand, trying to radiate physical intimidation. But I could see the tiny beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I could see the nervous flutter of his pulse at the base of his throat. He was a hollow shell of a man, and I was about to crush him. I reached out my hand and grasped the metal shaft of the microphone. Marcus gripped it tighter, refusing to let go. His eyes were wide, silently screaming at me to back down. "Let go of the microphone, Marcus," I said, my voice barely a whisper, meant only for his ears. If you fight me for it, you will look like a petulant child throwing a tantrum on his big night. Let it go." He stared at me, his chest heaving with trapped, suffocating rage. But he knew I was right. If he wrestled me for the microphone, the illusion of the composed, brilliant CEO would instantly shatter. Slowly, agonizingly, his fingers uncurled from the metal. I took the microphone. I pulled it from the stand, the cord trailing behind me, as I took one step forward, placing myself dead center on the landing, completely eclipsing my brother. I looked down at the sea of upturned, shocked faces. I looked at Chloe, who was clutching the worthless leather folio to her chest. I looked at my mother, who was gripping the banister as if the floor beneath her was shifting. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice echoed through the massive ballroom, cool, resonant, and dripping with absolute control. I apologize for the interruption, but as a member of this family, I felt it was absolutely necessary to step up and add a few words to my brother's incredibly moving speech. The room was so quiet, I could hear the gentle weeping of the ice sculptures melting on the front porch. "Marcus is entirely correct," I continued, my gaze sweeping deliberately across the crowd. "Building an empire requires vision. It requires an understanding of capital, a mastery of leverage, and the ability to distinguish between reality and delusion. It requires knowing exactly who is wearing the crown and who is simply acting as a stepping stone." I turned slightly, locking my eyes directly onto Marcus. He looked physically ill. The bravado was bleeding out of him by the second. "You spoke so highly of the venture capital firm that funded your new company," I said, my voice projecting clearly to every corner of the historic house. "You praised Apex Capital for their vision. You thanked them for recognizing your brilliance and granting you $2.5 million. I paused, letting the silence stretch out, letting the anticipation twist like a knife in the guts of my family. I smiled, a slow, freezing smile that held zero warmth. "But speaking of Apex Capital, Marcus," I asked, tilting my head slightly, "do you happen to know who the sole founder, president, and chairman of the board is?" Marcus scoffed, a short, breathless sound that failed to mask the sudden creeping panic in his eyes. He tightened his grip on the microphone stand, attempting to project an aura of unbothered amusement to the hundreds of guests watching us. "What are you talking about, Maya?" he asked, forcing a dismissive chuckle that sounded thin and hollow. "Some faceless Wall Street guy runs it. Some corporate board. Why does it matter who signed the check? The point is, they believed in my vision." I did not answer him with words. I simply reached into the beaded evening clutch resting at my side and pulled out a small, sleek, matte black remote control. My lead investigator, Sarah, had arrived an hour earlier under the guise of an event coordinator. With her usual ruthless efficiency, she had bypassed the technicians and seamlessly integrated a secure feed from my personal laptop directly into the elaborate audio-visual system my parents had rented for the evening. Directly behind Marcus, suspended from the ceiling of the mid-level landing, a massive drop-down projector screen had been displaying a looping high-definition slideshow of his supposed entrepreneurial journey. It was mostly a collection of staged photographs featuring Marcus wearing expensive bespoke suits, pointing at whiteboards, and shaking hands with investors who did not know any better. I raised the remote and pressed a single button. The projector clicked loudly. The glowing images of my brother's fabricated success abruptly vanished, replaced by the stark, blinding white background of a digitized legal document. The crisp, black text of the Apex Capital commercial funding agreement illuminated the entire staircase, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow over Marcus and my father. I pressed the forward button, and the document scrolled rapidly past the dense paragraphs of legal jargon, stopping dead on the final page, containing the execution and disbursement authorization signatures. They're blown up to 10 feet tall, for the mayor, the chief of police, the church elders, and the absolute wealthiest socialites in Atlanta to witness, was the unmistakable sweeping cursive signature authorizing the $2.5 million wire transfer. Beneath the digital ink, typed in bold, uncompromising font, read, "The indisputable truth, Maya Williams, Chief Executive Officer, Apex Capital." A sound swept through the grand ballroom, a collective sharp intake of breath from 300 people, simultaneously realizing they were witnessing a public execution. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy and thick with an almost suffocating tension. It was the kind of total paralyzing quiet that only occurs when a fundamental reality is violently overturned. Marcus slowly turned his head to look at the massive screen projecting behind him. I watched his eyes track the massive letters of my name. I watched his brain desperately try to reject the visual information it was receiving. He blinked rapidly, his mouth falling open as he looked back at me, then back at the screen. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked practically translucent. The illusion of the brilliant, untouchable tech CEO vanished in a microsecond, leaving behind nothing but a terrified little boy caught in a lie. His fingers went entirely limp. The heavy crystal Scotch glass slipped from his grasp. It hit the edge of the mahogany stair tread and shattered into 100 glittering pieces. The sharp, violent crash echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. The amber liquid splashed across the polished wood and soaked into his expensive leather shoes, but he did not even flinch. He just stood there, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his own destruction. Below us, Chloe took a stumbling step backward. Her silver sequined gown caught the light as she looked in sheer horror from the projected signature on the screen to my face. The counterfeit majesty she had worn so proudly all evening was stripped away in a single breath. My father, the great Pastor David, gripped the wooden railing of the staircase so hard his knuckles turned bone white. His legendary pastoral charm had completely short-circuited. He stared at the screen, his mind unable to reconcile the impoverished, jealous daughter he had created in his head with the titan of finance currently standing on his staircase. Vivian. My mother let out a strange, strangled gasp from the bottom of the stairs. She looked like she had just been physically struck. The murmurs of the church gossips, the whispers of Sister Jenkins and the mayor's wife began to surround her like a swarm of angry bees. Her social standing, the very currency she valued above human life, was burning to ash right in front of her. "This is a trick," Marcus finally managed to stammer. His voice was reedy, shaking uncontrollably as he pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "This is a fake document. You hacked the projector. You manipulated this. You are insane, Maya. You are actually insane." I stepped closer to him. The physical distance between us vanished. I locked my eyes onto his, narrowing my focus until the rest of the ballroom, the whispers of the crowd, and my horrified parents simply melted away. I wanted him to look into my eyes and see the absolute terrifying reality of his situation. I wanted him to feel the cold, crushing weight of the trap closing around his throat. "It is not a trick, Marcus," I said, my voice low, dangerous, and razor-sharp. "The wire transfer hit your personal checking account at exactly 9:14 on Tuesday morning. The routing numbers match the Apex Capital corporate treasury. You signed those digital closing documents via a secure portal using a verified IP address that traces directly back to your home office. You eagerly signed your name on the dotted line. You agreed to every single covenant. You took the money, my money." The whispers in the ballroom escalated into a scandalized roar. The elite of Atlanta realized that the mighty Marcus Williams, the so-called genius who had just bragged about his superior crown, was entirely funded by the sister his family had spent years publicly mocking, discarding, and slandering. "Maya, stop this right now," my father demanded, finally finding his voice. His deep baritone lacked its usual thunder. He tried to step between us, attempting to physically shield his golden son from my gaze. "Whatever petty, jealous sibling rivalry this is, it ends tonight. You will not humiliate this family in our own home. I command you to step down." I did not break eye contact with Marcus. I spoke directly over my father's shoulder, my voice amplifying to ensure it reached every corner of the historic house. "I am not standing here as your sister, Marcus," I declared, severing the familial bond with surgical precision. "I am standing here as your legal creditor. And as the chief executive officer of the institution currently holding your debt, I have a strict fiduciary duty to monitor exactly how my capital is being deployed." Marcus swallowed hard. The sweat I had seen forming earlier was now actively beading on his forehead, rolling down his temples, and catching the glare of the projector light. He looked trapped, a cornered animal, realizing there was no escape. You signed a binding commercial loan agreement. I continued pacing slowly across the landing, turning my body to address the captivated crowd below, as if giving a corporate presentation. That legal contract contained strict, non-negotiable usage covenants. The $2.5 million was legally earmarked exclusively for corporate payroll software development and approved technology infrastructure. It was capital meant to build a business. I turned back to Marcus, my smile chilling the very air around us. "But you did not do that, did you?" I asked, my tone dripping with lethal condescension. "You did not invest a single dime into your empty shell of a company. Instead, less than 48 hours after my money cleared your account, you walked into a luxury dealership in Buckhead." Chloe let out a sharp, panicked whimper from the floor below. She suddenly understood exactly what was happening. She knew exactly what I was about to say, and she knew there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Because you used that money to buy a supercar instead of investing it as committed." I stated, my words falling like heavy, inescapable stones upon the crowd. "You purchased a matte black Mercedes G-Wagon for $250,000. You parked it directly in front of this house tonight for everyone to see. You proudly posted it on social media. You publicly and arrogantly documented your own fraudulent misappropriation of commercial funds." My mother tried to rush up the stairs, her purple gown tangling around her legs in her desperation. "Maya, please. He is your brother," she cried out, abandoning her pride in favor of sheer panic. "He just wanted to celebrate his success. You cannot do this to him over a car. You cannot destroy him in front of our friends." "This is a corporate matter now, Vivian," I said, looking down at her with absolute freezing indifference. "Family ties do not supersede federal financial fraud." I raised my left hand, gesturing toward the back of the grand foyer. The heavy, towering oak doors swung open with a loud, dramatic creak. The crowd parted instantly, practically throwing themselves against the walls to get out of the way. Two massive, impeccably dressed private security operatives stepped into the house. They wore tailored black suits, communication earpieces, and expressions of absolute unyielding authority. They walked with deliberate, heavy strides across the foyer, their polished shoes echoing on the hardwood. They stopped at the base of the stairs, standing like sentinels waiting for my command. Marcus looked down at the guards, then back at me. His arrogant posture had completely collapsed. His shoulders slumped, his breathing ragged. He looked small, terrified, and utterly defeated. The crown he had boasted about moments ago had turned into a guillotine. "Because you have blatantly violated the financial covenants of our agreement?" I announced, my voice ringing out with the terrifying finality of a judge delivering an inescapable sentence. "I am officially triggering the default clause of your contract." I leaned in, closing the distance between us, my voice dropping to a harsh, uncompromising whisper right in his face. "I am canceling the grace period. I demand the immediate repayment of the $2.5 million. The absolute finality of my demand echoed through the grand ballroom, striking the crowd with the force of a physical blow. The silence was no longer just quiet. It was a suffocating, heavy vacuum. The air itself seemed to tilt, the entire room spinning off its axis as the fundamental reality of the Williams family was violently ripped apart. Marcus staggered backward, his expensive leather shoes crunching over the shards of his shattered Scotch glass. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes darting from the unyielding faces of my security operatives to the horrified stares of the church elders, and finally to our father, who was still frozen on the landing with his hand outstretched. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, to spin another lie, to deflect, but only a dry, pathetic wheeze escaped his throat. He had nothing. The brilliant CEO was reduced to a hyperventilating fraud clutching an empty microphone stand. It was my mother who broke the paralysis. Vivian practically tore herself away from the banister, her face contorting from shock into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The sheer desperation of losing her social standing in front of the mayor, her pastor husband, and the elite of Atlanta triggered a feral protective instinct. She marched to the center of the foyer, directly beneath the massive crystal chandelier, pointing a trembling finger up at me. "You have absolutely no right to do this, Maya. She screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the mahogany walls. Her chest heaved, her purple designer gown shimmering as she shook with fury. You think you can waltz in here with your corporate titles and your security guards and humiliate us? You think you can threaten your own brother over a business loan? We do not need your money. We never needed you. This house belongs to the family. I will sell this very estate tomorrow to pay off your petty debt just to get you out of our lives for good. She stood tall, breathing heavily, looking around the room as if expecting applause for her maternal bravery. She thought she had played the ultimate trump card. She thought the generational wealth of the Williams family was a fortress I could not breach. I looked down at her, feeling a profound, chilling sense of pity mixed with absolute triumph. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Sell it. I asked, my voice gliding over the tense crowd like ice water. I reached a hand out behind me. Sarah, my lead investigator who had silently materialized at the top of the stairs, placed a heavy authenticated legal document folder directly into my palm. It was not a prop. It was a certified notarized weapon. I held the thick manila folder up, staring directly into my mother's wild, defiant eyes. Did you somehow forget that 4 years ago the National Bank initiated a full foreclosure on this property? Because you and Dad defaulted on the primary mortgage for 8 consecutive months, I asked, projecting my voice clearly so that every single guest in the house heard the exact details of their financial ruin. Did you think the bank just magically stopped calling? Did you think your debt just vanished into thin air because you prayed about it at church? My father's face turned the color of ash. He took a staggering step backward, grabbing the wall for support. The leather folio he had so proudly handed to Marcus slipped from his grasp, tumbling down the carpeted stairs and landing face down near Vivian's feet. I bought this house outright from the bank the day before it was scheduled to go to public auction, I stated, dropping the final devastating truth on the room. I paid your toxic debt in full to keep you from being thrown out onto the street. This historic family estate has been legally registered under my holding company for 4 entire years. You do not own the walls. You do not own the floors. You do not even own the chandelier hanging over your head. I turned my gaze to my father, who looked as if he were actively having a heart attack. You just stood on that staircase and pompously announced that you were transferring the deed to Marcus, I said, shaking my head in slow, deliberate mock sympathy. You wrote a grand public will leaving a house that does not even belong to you. You gave your golden son a kingdom made of absolutely nothing but your own delusions. The reaction from this crowd was instantaneous and devastating. Sister Jenkins let out a loud, theatrical gasp, fanning her face with her program. The mayor leaned over and whispered something urgent to his security detail, clearly preparing to make a rapid, quiet exit to avoid the political fallout of being associated with a massive fraud scandal. The wealthy congregants who had spent decades kissing my parents' rings were now openly staring at them with disgust and pity. The Williams family legacy was dead. My mother collapsed onto the bottom step of the staircase, her legs simply giving out beneath her. She covered her face with her hands, letting out a sharp, ragged sob as the illusion of her high society life shattered into dust. My father remained frozen against the wall, staring blankly at the floor, stripped of his authority, his pride, and his pulpit. But the most spectacular reaction came from the woman standing near the front row. Chloe had been clutching the fraudulent transfer papers to her chest like a shield. As my words registered in her brain, as the irrefutable truth washed over her, her entire physical demeanor shifted. The sweet maternal, fiercely loyal wife act evaporated entirely. She looked down at the leather folio at her feet. She looked at the matte black G-Wagon parked outside the window, knowing it would be seized by morning. She looked at her husband, the man who had promised her an empire, millions in venture capital, and a lifetime of effortless luxury. She realized she was married to a man who owned absolutely nothing. The generational wealth was a lie. The business was an empty shell. The $2.5 million was gone. She was facing federal fraud investigations, crushing debt, and immediate eviction. Chloe dropped the papers. She slowly turned to face Marcus. Marcus, terrified by the look in her eyes, put his hands up defensively. Chloe, Baby, listen to me, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I can fix this. I can talk to the investors. We can structure a repayment. You lied to me! Chloe screamed, the sound tearing through the ballroom like a siren. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. Marcus took a step back, his eyes darting toward the exits. Chloe, please do not do this right now, not in front of everyone. You told me we were rich, she shrieked, launching herself at him. You told me you owned this house. You told me that money was ours. You are a broke, pathetic liar. She did not stop at screaming. The realization that her entire future had just been incinerated pushed her completely over the edge. She swung her arm, her hand striking Marcus hard across the face. The sharp, violent smack echoed loudly. Marcus stumbled, raising his arms to shield his face, but Chloe was relentless. She grabbed the lapels of his expensive bespoke velvet tuxedo, shaking him violently. You ruined my life, she shrieked, clawing at his chest, her manicured nails catching the fabric. I married a fraud. You have nothing. You are nothing. Marcus tried to push her away, but he was too panicked, too utterly defeated by my revelation to mount a defense. He tripped over the edge of the red carpet runner, falling backward into a tall, elaborate floral arrangement. The heavy crystal vase tipped over, crashing to the hardwood floor and sending water, shattered glass, and white roses spilling across the ground. Marcus scrambled backward like a crab scrambling over the wet floor to get away from his enraged wife. My two security operatives stepped forward, instantly moving with calm, clinical precision. They did not touch Marcus. They simply stepped between him and Chloe, forming an impenetrable human wall to prevent the physical altercation from escalating further into a full brawl. Chloe thrashed against the guard, screaming obscenities at Marcus. Her silver dress stained with water, her carefully styled hair falling wildly around her face. I stood on the landing above them, watching the absolute destruction of the people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They had demanded a spectacular gala. They had begged me to come and witness their triumph. I had simply obliged them. I looked down at the wreckage. My mother weeping on the stairs. My father broken against the wall. My brother cowering on the wet floor behind my security team. My sister-in-law screaming like a banshee. The jazz quartet had long since packed their instruments and fled. The guests were rapidly streaming toward the front doors, eager to escape the collapsing house before the police inevitably arrived to investigate the financial crimes I had just laid bare. I turned my back on the chaos, handing the microphone to Sarah. The deed was done. The truth was out. The Williams family legacy was finally permanently extinguished. But the spectacle was far from over. As I handed the microphone back to Sarah, preparing to walk away from the wreckage of my family, a new and entirely distinct sound pierced through the collective shock of the retreating crowd. It was not another scream of rage. It was a high-pitched, desperate, highly theatrical wail. If a camera had been circling the grand ballroom, gliding fluidly through the frozen, horrified guests, it would have captured the exact calculated microsecond where Chloe realized that physically assaulting Marcus was not going to restore her vanished wealth. She knew she was trapped in a house she did not own, married to a man with zero assets facing imminent federal fraud charges. So she resorted to the oldest, most insidious survival tactic in her playbook. She dropped heavily to the wet, ruined hardwood floor, right amid the crushed white roses and shattered crystal of the broken vase. She curled her body inward, pulling her knees up and wrapping both arms fiercely around her slightly swollen belly. The manic, furious shrieks transformed instantly into loud, hyperventilating sobs. It was a masterful, instantaneous pivot from enraged gold digger to helpless, terrified victim. She looked up, her mascara perfectly smudged beneath her wide, panic-stricken eyes, aiming her tear-streaked face directly at the departing crowd. The grand foyer was still packed with the most prominent, wealthy Black families of Greater Grace Ministries, alongside the city officials my father had courted for decades. Chloe knew exactly what she was doing. She was weaponizing her fragility. She was banking on the inherent cultural empathy of the church elders and the maternal instincts of the older women in the room. Please, Chloe wailed, her voice cracking with manufactured terror, reaching a trembling hand out toward the congregation. Please, you have to believe me. I did not know anything about this. I am just a mother trying to protect her unborn child. The mass exodus toward the heavy oak doors immediately slowed. The steady shuffle of expensive shoes ground to a halt. Human nature is a predictable thing, and the sight of a sobbing pregnant woman on the floor naturally commands attention. Sister Jenkins stopped in her tracks, her hand hovering over her pearl necklace, her eyes darting between my weeping sister-in-law and my stoic, unyielding stance on the staircase. Several deacons exchanged uneasy glances. The collective mood of the room began to waver, teetering on the edge of misplaced sympathy. "They forced me to do it!" Chloe cried out, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. She pointed a shaking, accusatory finger directly at Marcus, who was still cowering behind my security team, and then dragged her finger upward to point at my father. They lied to me. Marcus told me the money was a legitimate investment. Pastor David told me this house was ours. He told me the Williams legacy would protect us. I am a victim of this family's corruption. I come from nothing, I just wanted to be loved, and they used me. They forced me to go along with this nightmare. My father let out a strangled gasp, stepping away from the wall as if he had been physically struck by her accusation. "Chloe, how dare you?" He stammered, his pastoral voice shaking with a mix of outrage and terror. But Chloe ignored him, weeping louder, burying her face in her hands. "I did not know the money was stolen," she sobbed, rocking back and forth on the floor. "I am innocent. Please have mercy on me and my baby." I stood completely still on the landing, watching her performance with a cold, clinical fascination. It was a desperate, transparent attempt to paint me the dark-skinned, composed, financially ruthless woman standing above her as the cruel aggressor, while casting herself as the naive, manipulated captive of my corrupt father and brother. She was betting everything on those white tears. She was betting that the congregation would turn their judgment entirely onto the Williams men and offer her their protection. I turned back to Sarah. She was already holding my digital tablet, her face an unreadable mask of professional efficiency. She did not need a verbal command. We had prepared for every possible contingency, including this exact brand of emotional manipulation. I took one step back toward the edge of the landing, looking down at the sobbing woman on the floor. "You are a truly remarkable actress, Chloe," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, ringing clarity that effortlessly cut through her hysterical crying. "You truly are. But there is one fundamental flaw in your performance tonight." Chloe stopped rocking, her sobs hitched in her throat. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, genuine spike of fear. "When I purchased this property from the bank 4 years ago," I continued, my words dropping like ice onto the silent crowd. "I had it fully integrated with Apex Capital's corporate security framework. That includes high-definition cloud-backed audio and visual surveillance in every primary living space to protect my assets, including the grand parlor right down the hall." I nodded at Sarah. Sarah tapped a single key on the tablet. The massive audio system that had been playing soft jazz just an hour ago crackled to life. Suddenly a voice blasted through the ballroom speakers. It was crisp, cold, and dripping with malicious entitlement. It was undeniably Chloe's voice, completely devoid of the hysterical, weeping fragility she was currently displaying on the floor. "Are you an idiot, Marcus?" the recorded voice of Chloe snapped. The audio was crystal clear, capturing the faint clink of a glass in the background. "Just use her LLC credentials. Maya is too obsessed with her little spreadsheets to even notice the wire transfer." A collective gasp swept through the church members. Sister Jenkins physically recoiled, pressing her hand over her mouth. Then the panicked, recorded voice of my brother echoed through the room. "It is federal fraud, Chloe. If she catches us, she will destroy me. You do not know how ruthless she is. She will not catch us." The recorded. Chloe sneered, her tone vicious and utterly dismissive. "And if she does, your father will just shame her into silence like he always does. Pastor David has that entire church completely brainwashed. He will just stand at the pulpit and say it was a private family loan. I want that G-Wagon, Marcus. I want the lifestyle you promised me. Just forge the damn signature. She is your sister, she owes us this money. Take it. Sarah tapped the tablet again, cutting the audio. The sharp silence that slammed back into the room was absolutely toxic. It was not the silence of shock or confusion. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of pure, irrevocable disgust. The white tears had completely spectacularly backfired. Chloe sat frozen on the floor, her mouth hanging open, her hands dropping away from her stomach. The innocent victim routine was dead, shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. The crowd of wealthy donors, politicians, and church elders stared at her with expressions of absolute contempt. They had heard her orchestrate the theft. Worse, they had heard her explicitly state that my father, their revered pastor, had them all brainwashed and would use his religious authority to cover up a felony. "You are not a victim, Chloe," I said, staring down at her with total apathy. "You are the architect of your own destruction." That was the final breaking point. The crowd did not just leave, they fled. Sister Jenkins turned her back on my mother, her face tight with revulsion, and marched straight toward the front doors. The mayor signaled his security detail and practically jogged out of the foyer, desperate to distance himself from the toxic fallout. The deacons, the choir members, and the wealthy socialites turned away en masse, a wave of expensive fabrics and sharp, angry whispers flooding out into the humid Atlanta night. My father snapped out of his paralysis. He lunged toward the departing crowd, his arms outstretched, his voice cracking with a pathetic, desperate panic. "Wait! Please, brothers, sisters, wait!" David begged. Stumbling down the stairs, his pastoral dignity entirely stripped away. "Do not leave. We can pray on this. The enemy is trying to divide us. Please, you know my heart, you know my ministry." Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked at him. The people who had hung on his every word for decades, the people who had funded his lavish lifestyle and fed his towering ego, simply walked out. They brushed past him as if he were a ghost, leaving him standing in the center of the foyer, reaching out to an empty room. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind the last guest, the booming sound echoing through the cavernous, newly seized property. The brownstone was silent. The grand party was over. My mother was weeping uncontrollably on the stairs. My brother was shivering behind my security guards. Chloe was staring blankly at the wet floor, completely ruined. And Pastor David Williams stood alone in the center of the room, his congregation gone. His reputation annihilated, his entire world burned to the ground. I turned back toward the staircase railing, my movements deliberately slow, anchoring the center of the room in absolute stillness. The world around me seemed to shift into a surreal, suspended state of slow motion. The frantic scrambling of Atlanta's elite escaping through the grand oak doors blurred into a chaotic wash of colors. The panicked shouts of the church elders faded into a dull, distant hum. I was the eye of the hurricane, untouched by the devastating winds I had just unleashed. Sarah stepped up beside me. She did not speak. She simply handed me a third, surprisingly thin manila folder. It felt incredibly light in my hands, yet it contained the weight of multiple federal felonies. Down below, the foyer was nearly empty of guests. The opulent space was now nothing more than a ruined battlefield. Smashed crystal glittered dangerously on the soaked hardwood. Crushed white roses lay trampled underfoot. Chloe had collapsed completely, sobbing hysterically against the base of a marble pillar, while my security team maintained their imposing barrier between her and Marcus. My brother was huddled on the floor, his bespoke velvet tuxedo stained with water and scotch, his hands trembling as he covered his face. My father and mother were clinging to each other near the coat check, two pillars of the community reduced to terrified, shivering shells. The absolute finality of their ruin had settled over them, but they still did not understand the true depth of the abyss they had dug for themselves. I raised the thin manila folder. I held it out over the mahogany banister, letting it slip from my fingers. It fluttered down through the air, flipping gracefully before landing with a sharp, definitive smack right in the center of the wet, ruined red carpet. The sound acted like a physical trigger. Marcus flinched, pulling his knees tightly to his chest. My father stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. That is the final piece of the puzzle, I said, my voice cutting through the residual sobbing in the room. It was perfectly level, devoid of any anger or malice. It was simply the voice of a corporate executioner reading the ledger. I highly suggest you open it, David. My father did not move. He was too paralyzed by fear. It was my mother who broke away from him. Vivian crawled forward on her hands and knees. Her expensive purple gown dragged through the spilled water and broken glass, the fabric soaking up the ruin of her own party. She reached out with shaking fingers and pulled the folder open. Inside was a single stack of paper bound by a heavy metal clip. It was the guarantor agreement for the $2.5 million venture capital loan. Read the signature line, Vivian. I commanded, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Read the name of the primary guarantor who secured that aggressive line of credit for your golden boy. Vivian stared at the paper. Her eyes darted back and forth across the text. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She dropped the document as if it had physically burned her. I will say it for you, I announced, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. That loan was not secured by the Williams Family Trust. That loan was not secured by this brownstone because, as we have already established, you do not own it. That $2.5 million was unconditionally guaranteed by my personal Social Security number. Marcus let out a strangled, breathless choke. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it bordered on madness. You needed a flawless credit profile and a massive asset base to secure that level of funding from a top-tier firm, I explained, pacing slowly along the landing, looking down at the four of them. And since Marcus has the financial literacy of a reckless teenager, and you two have been technically insolvent for 4 years, you decided to simply steal my identity. You used my name, my corporate standing, and my personal Social Security number to illegally authorize a massive corporate loan. I stopped pacing and leaned over the banister, my eyes locking onto my father. That is not just bad business, Pastor David, I said, the title tasting like ash in my mouth. That is intentional, premeditated identity theft. That is wire fraud. That is a textbook violation of federal financial statutes. The absolute crushing reality of those words finally broke them. The illusion of a simple family disagreement was gone. They were no longer dealing with a disobedient daughter or a frustrated sister. They were dealing with the federal penal code. My father's knees buckled. The man who had stood at the pulpit for 30 years commanding the respect and adoration of thousands simply collapsed onto the wet hardwood floor. He fell to his hands and knees right next to my mother. Maya, please, David begged. His deep, resonant voice was gone, replaced by a high, desperate whine. The sound was pathetic, entirely stripped of the patriarchal authority he had wielded like a weapon my entire life. Please, I am begging you, do not do this. We had to do it. Marcus needed the money to launch the app. He promised us the company would go public. We were going to pay the loan back before you ever found out. You were going to use my identity to fund his luxury car collection, I corrected him coldly. You stole my name to buy his wife sequined dresses. Vivian reached her hands up toward the staircase, her fingers grasping blindly at the air. Her face was streaked with black mascara, her heavy amethyst necklace tangled awry. Maya, we are your family, she wailed, her voice echoing with sheer, unadulterated desperation. We are your blood. You came from my womb. You cannot do this to us. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to federal prison. We are your parents. Please, Maya, I will do anything. We will give you everything we have. Just please do not call the police. I looked down at the two of them kneeling on the floor, begging for their freedom. I felt no satisfaction. I felt no joy. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical emptiness. They had spent my entire life making me feel invisible, treating me as a stepping stone to elevate Marcus, and the moment their golden facade cracked, they dared to weaponize the concept of blood. You do not have anything left to give me, Vivian, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving tone. And you lost the right to call yourselves my parents the day you decided my future was expendable to fund his ego. You did not look at me as a daughter. You looked at me as a credit score. You looked at me as collateral. I turned my gaze to Marcus. He was pressing himself against the wall, trying to shrink into the shadows, hoping to somehow escape the reckoning. "And you," I said, addressing my brother. "You stood on this very staircase 20 minutes ago and told a room full of people that I was destined to be a stepping stone. You told them you were born to wear a crown." I walked down the first 3 steps, stopping just out of their reach. "Where is your crown now, Marcus?" I asked. Because all I see is a terrified, fraudulent little boy who is about to lose everything he ever pretended to be. Marcus could not even look at me. He buried his face in his hands and began to weep loud, heavy, gasping sobs that echoed pathetically through the grand foyer. Chloe, seeing her husband reduced to a crying, broken mess, turned her face to the wall in absolute disgust. "Maya, please." My father pleaded again, crawling slightly forward until his hands touched the bottom step. "I will step down from the church. I will resign the ministry tomorrow. I will publicly apologize to you in front of the entire congregation. Just let us fix this internally. Do not bring the authorities into this house. It will destroy everything we have ever built." I stared at the man who had demanded my absolute obedience for 3 decades. I looked at his desperate, pleading eyes, searching for a shred of the father I had once sought approval from. There was nothing there but cowardice. "I did not bring the authorities into this house, David," I said, my voice perfectly calm. The words hung in the air, confusing them. My mother stopped crying for a fraction of a second, her brow furrowing. Marcus lifted his head, his tear-streaked face a picture of pure bewilderment. "What do you mean?" Vivian rasped, her hands shaking as she clutched her ruined dress. Right on cue, as if summoned by the very weight of their sins, a sound pierced the heavy, suffocating silence of the brownstone. It started as a faint, distant wail echoing through the humid Atlanta night. Within seconds, the sound grew louder, multiplying and layering upon itself until the unmistakable piercing shriek of multiple police sirens filled the air. Through the massive arched, stained glass windows above the front doors, intense flashes of red and blue light began to rapidly strobe across the walls of the grand foyer. The flashing colors painted my parents' terrified faces in alternating shades of crimson and blue. "You really thought I was the only person you owed money to?" I asked, my voice slicing through the approaching roar of the sirens. Marcus let out a horrifying, guttural scream. He scrambled backward, knocking over another chair, pressing himself into the deepest corner of the foyer, as the reality of his situation finally crushed him. "You spent the last 6 months aggressively pitching your fake technology firm to every angel investor in the tri-state area," I explained, looking down at my brother with absolute chilling finality. "You took their money based on fabricated financial projections. And unlike me, those investors do not share your blood." The sirens grew deafening, pulling directly into the long cobblestone driveway surrounding the estate entirely. The heavy thud of car doors slamming shut echoed outside. "I did not call the police," I said, taking one final step back up the stairs, removing myself entirely from their proximity. "I simply forwarded the exact same legal documents I just showed you to the other 3 investment groups you defrauded. I let them know that your company was a shell, your assets were non-existent, and your primary guarantor was completely fabricated." My father collapsed entirely, his forehead resting against the cold, wet hardwood floor. He began to pray, a rapid, frantic, whispered stream of desperate words that no one was listening to. "They called the authorities," Marcus restated, turning my back on them and walking up toward the second-floor landing. "They called the FBI, and they are at the front door." Heavy, authoritative pounding began on the grand oak doors, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. Police, a loud, amplified voice shouted from outside, "Open the door immediately!" I did not look back. I continued walking up the sweeping staircase, the flashing red and blue lights casting long, dramatic shadows against the mahogany walls. The grand historical brownstone, the ultimate symbol of the Williams family prosperity, had officially become a crime scene. Their empire was gone, their legacy was shattered, and the stepping stone had just become the architect of their absolute destruction. The heavy oak doors splintered inward before my father could even take a single step toward them. They did not just open, They were violently forced apart, crashing against the interior walls with a booming thud that shook the foundation of the historic house. A tide of federal agents and uniformed police officers swarmed into the grand foyer. Their heavy tactical boots trampled over the pristine red carpet, grinding the crushed white roses and shattered crystal deep into the expensive fibers. The air, previously thick with the scent of expensive perfume and truffles, was instantly dominated by the sharp metallic crackle of police radios and barked commands that left absolutely no room for negotiation or pastoral charm. Marcus let out a high-pitched guttural sound of pure terror. He scrambled backward across the wet floor, his expensive velvet tuxedo soaking up the stagnant water from the shattered vases. He tried to push himself into the corner behind the sweeping staircase, but two federal agents were on him in a fraction of a second. They hauled him roughly to his feet. The golden child of the Williams family, the brilliant tech visionary who had just bragged about wearing a crown, wept openly as they slammed him face first against the mahogany wall. The sharp metallic click of silver handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the foyer, sounding exactly like a vault door slamming shut on his entire life. An agent began reciting his Miranda rights, listing off federal wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Each charge struck Marcus like a physical blow, causing his knees to buckle until the agents were practically carrying his dead weight. Chloe did not run to her husband's side. She did not throw her arms around him or beg the officers for mercy. The moment she saw the silver cuffs lock around Marcus's wrists, every single ounce of her fabricated devotion vanished into the humid night air. An agent took a step toward her, pulling a notepad from his jacket, but Chloe violently shoved her hands in the air. She backed away, as if Marcus had suddenly become radioactive. She shrieked that she knew nothing, that she was just a victim, that he had lied to her about everything, and she was entirely innocent. She did not wait for the agent to finish his question. She pulled out her phone, her shaking fingers frantically tapping the illuminated screen to summon a rideshare. Without a single backward glance at the man she had sworn to love through thick and thin, she turned and sprinted out the front door. She bypassed the flashing police cruisers, her ruined silver sequined dress disappearing into the darkness of the street. The queen consort had abandoned her ruined king to save her own skin, leaving him to rot. I watched it all unfold from the landing above, my posture perfectly straight, my crimson dress a sharp contrast against the dark wood of the banister. When Marcus was dragged out the front doors whimpering and entirely broken, I turned my attention back to the base of the stairs. My parents were huddled together near a decorative marble console table. They looked like strangers. The powerful, charismatic Pastor David and the formidable society-obsessed Vivian were gone. In their place were two hollow, terrified people watching their magnificent empire turn to ash. I descended the stairs slowly, my heels clicking with a steady, rhythmic finality against the wood. The federal agents recognized me immediately. I was the cooperating witness. I was the primary creditor who had handed them the digital paper trail that dismantled Marcus's fraudulent enterprise. They gave me a wide, respectful berth as I crossed the ruined foyer. I stopped directly in front of the marble console table. My parents shrank back, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and profound disbelief. They expected me to scream. They expected me to gloat. They expected an emotional outburst that they could somehow manage, mitigate, or manipulate. I gave them nothing but absolute freezing composure. I held the heavy manila folder Sarah had handed me earlier. I opened it and extracted a single crisp white sheet of paper. If a camera had been filming this exact moment, the lens would have zoomed in, pushing tight onto my hands. My fingers, steady and perfectly manicured, pressed the document flat against the cold marble surface of the table. I slowly, deliberately slid the paper across the polished stone until it rested directly under my parents' trembling hands. The stark black text at the top of the page was impossible to misinterpret. It was a formal, legally binding notice of eviction. You stood on that staircase earlier tonight and told a room full of people that I was destined to be a stepping stone. I said, my voice dropping to a calm, icy register that carried absolute authority. You spent my entire life telling me that I did not belong in this family's grand legacy. You told me I had no place in your kingdom. I leaned forward slightly, forcing them to look me in the eye. You were right, I whispered the words, striking them like a physical curse. I have no place in your fabricated legacy, because I built my own. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate my house. Vivian stared down at the eviction notice. Her eyes darted frantically across the legal seals, the court stamps, and the undeniable proof that her entire life was legally owned by the daughter she had despised. The realization was too massive, too violently destructive for her mind to process. The grand society galas, the country club memberships, the prestige of being the pastor's wealthy wife, it was all instantly annihilated. She let out a sharp, ragged gasp, clawing at her throat, as if she could no longer pull oxygen into her lungs. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed, fainting dead away onto the waterlogged floor. David dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering uselessly over her prone form. But before he could even call out for medical help, a shadow fell over him. A senior FBI agent stepped up behind my father, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. The agent's expression was grim and entirely devoid of the reverence my father was accustomed to receiving from his congregation. David Williams. The agent stated, his voice cutting through the remaining tension in the room. You just stood in front of 300 witnesses and publicly announced the transfer of assets purchased with stolen federal funds. You are going to have to come with us to answer some questions regarding your complicity in your son's financial fraud. My father looked up, his jaw trembling. He opened his mouth to deploy his legendary pastoral charm to spin a narrative of a misunderstood father trying to bless his son, but the agent simply shook his head and pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The sharp click of the restraints locking around David's wrists echoed loudly. He was hauled to his feet, stripped of his dignity, his bespoke suit stained with the dirty water from the floor. He did not look at me as they marched him out the door. He kept his head bowed, the mighty patriarch finally broken by the weight of his own breathtaking hubris. Paramedics arrived moments later to tend to my unconscious mother. They hoisted her limp body onto a stretcher and rolled her out the heavy oak doors, following the exact same path of absolute disgrace as her husband and her golden son. The federal agents finished cataloging the scene, securing the perimeter, and stepping out into the humid night. The flashing red and blue lights finally faded from the stained glass windows. The chaotic blare of police radios and sirens drifted away down the oak-lined street, disappearing into the distance until there was nothing left. Sarah gave me a silent, respectful nod before signaling our private security team to exit through the rear of the property. I stood completely alone in the center of the grand foyer. The massive brownstone was empty. The garish ice sculptures outside had melted into nothing but useless puddles on the brick walkway. The shattered crystal and ruined roses lay scattered across my floor. I looked up at the soaring ceiling, breathing in the cool, clean air. For the first time in my entire life, the house was consumed by a perfect, unbroken silence. Exactly 1 month later, that silence still held, but it was no longer heavy or suffocating. It was bright. The morning sun poured through the arched, stained glass windows, casting vibrant, colorful patterns across the newly cleaned hardwood floors. I walked slowly through the empty grand foyer, my footsteps echoing lightly in the vast space. The oppressive mahogany furniture, the gaudy portraits of my father, the suffocating velvet drapes, they were all gone. The brownstone was finally breathing. The fallout from that night had been swift and absolutely merciless. Marcus was currently sitting in a federal holding facility downtown, denied bail as he awaited trial for multiple counts of wire fraud and identity theft. Chloe had wasted no time. The very next morning, her lawyer filed emergency divorce papers, and she practically vanished into thin air, leaving absolutely no forwarding address. My parents had fared no better. Stripped of their pastoral titles and entirely excommunicated by the church elders, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, David and Vivian had been forced to move into a cramped, dilapidated 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Their empire of illusions had crumbled into absolute ruin. I stopped in the center of the former parlor, running my hand along the edge of a sledgehammer resting on a heavy canvas tarp. I picked it up, feeling the solid weight of the wood and steel. I took a deep breath, swung the hammer back, and drove it incredibly hard into the dark, oppressive plaster wall. The crack was deafening and deeply satisfying. Dust bloomed into the crisp sunlight. I swung again, tearing away the physical remnants of my past. This historic estate was no longer a monument to male ego and generational deceit. I was gutting it down to the studs. By next spring, the Williams Foundation for Female Entrepreneurs would open its doors right here, providing venture capital and legal protection to women building their own empires from scratch. As I lowered the hammer to inspect the damage, Sarah walked into the room, her boots crunching over the plaster debris. She held out a single wrinkled envelope. It had arrived at my corporate office that morning. I recognized the frantic, shaking handwriting immediately. I tore open the seal and pulled out the lined paper. It was completely soaked, the ink running in dark, smeared rivers from Vivian's desperate tears. The letter was a frantic, rambling plea from her shabby new reality, begging me for a financial lifeline, begging for mercy, and begging for the forgiveness of the daughter she had spent her entire life trying to destroy. I did not finish reading the letter. I simply folded the damp, pathetic pages back into their envelope and walked away from the construction zone, leaving the dust and the memories of the Williams family behind for good. The air shifted, the harsh sunlight of the gutted brownstone fading into the warm, ambient glow of my downtown penthouse. High above the city skyline, the evening traffic was nothing more than silent, glittering rivers of light. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline reflecting perfectly against the polished glass. The frantic noise of my past had been entirely replaced by the luxurious, unshakable quiet of my present. I walked over to the sleek marble coffee table, picking up a heavy silver lighter. I held my mother's tear-stained envelope over a thick crystal ashtray. With a swift, definitive flick of my thumb, the flame ignited. I touched the fire to the edge of the paper, watching the cursive ink curl, blacken, and turn to ash. I dropped the burning remnants into the crystal basin and reached for my glass of vintage Bordeaux. I took a slow sip of the rich red wine, letting the quiet triumph of the moment settle over me. They said a woman could not build a legacy on her own. I said, my voice steady and resonant in the quiet room. They tried to force me into being a stepping stone for a worthless man, all in the blind, toxic pursuit of tradition. Because of their greed, they lost their dignity, they lost their freedom, and they lost a daughter who would have once laid down her life for them. The view slowly pulled back, capturing the full magnitude of the penthouse, the priceless artwork, the impeccable design, the absolute, undeniable proof of a self-made empire. And me, I continued looking directly forward. I took back my house, I evicted the parasites, and I wrote the living will for my own life. I swirled the dark wine in my glass, the flames in the ashtray burning down to a glowing ember. Remember this, ladies, I said, my tone shifting into a sharp, uncompromising finality. Never let anyone, not even those who share your blood, dictate your value. Buy the scale yourself. I took one final sip of wine. The pulsing, rhythmic beat of a powerful bass line began to swell in the background, vibrating through the penthouse floors. My gaze remained locked forward, sharp, unyielding, and completely free. The screen faded to a flawless, infinite black.